As a media buyer, it's just a super fragmented space. At scale, you don't know what you're getting. There might be 500 really high quality newsletters that you should be buying, but you don't know what they are. You don't know who to talk to, and you don't have the time to do it. We're on the verge of unifying this space and creating real rules, how you should be buying, how we should be measuring, and what it should look like across any delivery platform. Ultimately, standardization and an easy way of buying at scale and getting high quality is what's going to change.
All right, guys, welcome back to the Letterland podcast. We have a very special guest with us today. He's going to be sitting in the third chair, and that is Jeffrey Eisenberg from Media Intercept. Those of you guys who are in the newsletter game probably know Media Intercept a little bit. They help you sling ads. That's probably not doing the entire business justice, but I will let Jeff introduce himself. Thanks for being with us today, Jeff.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. Big fan of the pod, long time listener, first time caller kind of thing. Media Intercept, for those of you who don't know, we sit sort of in the middle between advertisers and newsletters. So it's really a two-sided business. On the one hand, we serve, sort of like an agency for brands, helping them navigate the space, figuring out what to buy, trying to get efficient pricing if we can. Water coolers has been tough for us, but I think we finally cracked that one. And then on the other side, we do serve as like a backfill revenue solution for hundreds, if not at this point, I think over 1,000 newsletters. So they're almost like two separate businesses, really. Like we have two separate arms of the company, and then they sort of come together in the middle.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll give the full review in a couple of weeks. We just started working together again, so we'll see how things go. Hopefully you can get me out of this basement. So what we want to do today, we get a ton of questions from readers. A lot of them are about sales because that is top of mind for newsletter business builders. And we want to bring an expert to answer them. So we're going to just hop into a bunch of questions and take it from there. That's cool.
Yeah, it's great.
All right. So I want to get this first one here. This is kind of the antithesis of your business. So I'm curious what your thoughts are here, Jeff. But are you seeing any movement toward post-purchase surveys or other non-click tracking methods to justify newsletter spend, right? So I think, what they're saying here is, not just kind of pure performance stuff, but like really trying to be able to capture that brand awareness.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think it's the antithesis. I think, as a whole, certainly like our company, we're making a shift, a very conscious shift away from performance. It's always going to be a part of what we do. You're still going to have to look at the underlying metrics, whether your goal is awareness or a conversion, right? Because you're still going to have to determine, even if I'm not, if you're Coca-Cola, you're not trying to sell a can of Coke on an ad, right? You're just trying to create awareness and create brand equity. But you still have to determine, was that ad achieving that? And you can only do that by looking at different engagement metrics. So I don't know that a survey is the way that I would go, just because my philosophy is always, if you're going to ask the audience to do something, whether it's click or give you information, you have to provide some sort of value. And, maybe if it's a giveaway or something, but I think that anytime you add so many steps into a process, it makes it non-organic. But I think, there are certainly other things, all the metrics. Yes, we sell on a CPC, but we also do a lot of flat rate. We do a lot of awareness, and we're doing more and more of it every day. And I think, this channel has been underserved by the branding advertisers, but I think that's going to change as we continue to grow and become more legitimate as a media channel. But you're still looking at things like bounce rate, if there is a click. I think there's a lot of tracking you can do on the newsletter side, especially if you can see how far someone's scrolling down through a newsletter, time spent on an open. If you're pixeling, I would say so coming from video, for example, I used to sell a pre-roll ad, and you would have an advertiser say I'm not happy with the click-through rate. And my answer would be do you want them to click or do you want them to watch your ad? So right. You can make the sort of same argument here that if the goal is branding, do you want them to click on the ad? Is that a determining factor of its effectiveness? Or maybe it is a survey lower down or some sort of contest or something where there's a logo at the top, so they see that. But if they scroll down and you're below the fold and they're engaging with something below the fold that's more text-based, that gives you an indication that what you're doing is effective, even if there's no conversion to be tracked. So I know that's a long answer to that question, and happy to expound upon that. But I think there's a lot of different ways to determine the effectiveness of something without it being a click or a survey or something that's asking too much of the audience itself.
I think it's a good point, and I really liked what you said about like the maturity of the newsletter business, right? Because it's like it's been around for so long, like right longer than YouTube and the popularity of all that, but it still lags so far behind in kind of like the actual like big players connecting into the newsletter space. I feel like there's still this huge disconnect. And I guess my hope is that like I'm sure we'll get into this later, but like the race to Google 0 clicks, right, is hopefully going to force their hand, and like they're not really going to have a choice but to get into the newsletter game. But I'm hoping that makes some other opportunities for us to show engagement with ways other than just like, hey, we sold stuff or we got a click for you.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I'm happy to spend all day talking about like why I think it hasn't happened yet in terms of maturity. I think a lot of it, but I won't spend all day. I'll do it very quickly if you're interested. But I think a lot.
I am interested.
So like there's a couple of ways that like when you look at the newsletter business, like historically, you've got originally like legacy publishers that were publishing newsletters, not so much like to make money, but really as like an audience retention tool. So if we're talking about like big like magazine companies like Time Inc. or companies of that size, or a Vox or something like that, like their purpose was not to create content. Like they'd rather sell pre-roll, they'd rather sell branded content. They use the newsletter as a tool historically to grow audiences or retain audiences, or potentially drive to like a branded content article or a commerce article they published on site. And if you're a big media buyer, you're spending a lot of dollars with those companies, along with Google and Facebook and the other social platforms. You're not necessarily buying newsletter first. I think the other piece is if they are selling ads, they were giving them away, as value add as part of a bigger package.
I'm getting PTSD from my Barstool time. Yeah. Like your newsletter is value add, right? I was a rounding error to a rounding error, but
we could talk about, I tried to get Media Intercept into Barstool because I had some relationships there, but they were like, yeah, we don't care about monetizing it. That's like literally what they told me. I don't know that
they told me as they kicked me out the door.
I don't know that Erica Nardini or whatever her last name is now, Badan, would have been happy to hear that, but that's what I was told by my buddy who was the seller there. But yeah, I mean, I think historically that was the issue. And then I think like more recently, like you have some bigger newsletters that have been successful and can stand on their own, right? So whether it's The Skim was the big sort of first one, and then Morning Brew and 1440. And then there's a few others. But as a media buyer, like it's just a super fragmented space. It's not easy to buy like at scale. You don't know what you're getting. I think like the metrics in terms of buying, whether they're list size or open rate, are not totally reliable. And so they don't fit into like the traditional buying methodology that an agency would look at. CPM. So CPM is based on impressions. So we're going to say impressions are what? Their sends or their opens. But if the open rate isn't really like, you can't really determine it because the iOS updates have made every email that goes to an Apple device an open. Like how do we buy it? And I think like, again, the fragmentation piece, like if you're a media buyer, even if you go to like a Beehive or a ConvertKit or a Substack, who doesn't even have an ad buying platform, you don't know what you're getting. And there might be 500 like really high quality newsletters that you should be buying, but you don't know what they are. You don't know who to talk to, and you don't have the time to do it. And I think the last piece is like, you would think, okay, well, someone should create some sort of programmatic solution. So you can just buy all of it at scale and audience target. And like that was live intent and acquisition by Zeta aside, like I don't think anyone would consider, I mean, no offense to them, but like live intent to be like a success, whether you're a publisher, like you're not happy with the revenue you're getting. And then like, I just think the technology is so old, and whether it's you can't pull the data from the email to effectively target programmatically, I think is one issue. They also weren't frequency capping. I mean, even today, how many Fisher Investments ads do I get from live intent? It's like they're their only advertiser because they don't frequency cap. And so it's just put a bad taste in everybody's mouth. But I think, we're on the verge. I mean, whether it's my company or others, we're about to launch a platform that's going to solve for a lot of this. But I think there are others working on the problem as well of unifying this space and creating real rules around like how you should be buying, how we should be measuring, and what it should look like across any platform, whether it's a newsletter that's published on Beehive, published on Substack, published on ConvertKit, or MailChimp or any other delivery platform. I think, ultimately standardization and an easy way of buying at scale and getting high quality is what's going to change.
I think we are talking to the savior of the newsletter space. This is what we've all been looking for, is some leadership here in the in this. Yeah, because live intent is certainly not the answer. I'll say what you won't. It sucks.
I mean, it's a good idea. It's a theory that should work well. I think in practice it doesn't. Which isn't to say that someone isn't going to come in. I mean, look, we are approached frequently by ad servers, and we can talk about the difference between like an ad served ad in a newsletter versus like a true native ad. And I think those are important things to discuss. There is an argument to be made that if you could serve true native at scale, like that's a solution. But the issue is, even if you run like a GAM unit, like a Google Ad Manager unit that looks exactly like what you would just put in HTML5 like copy into your newsletter, it's just not the same. Like first of all, the whole thing's clickable, so you're going to get a bunch of inadvertent clicks. And I think you have ad blocking. That's another issue. And I think people are trained as consumers just to like skip right over that. Like that's not content. I can see the difference. It's a tough problem, but I do think that there's enough motivation now, like given how large the space is and sort of the heat on the space in terms of some of the investment dollars you're seeing coming in for some of these companies to figure it out.
Any thoughts here, Louis?
No, this is a part of the newsletter space that I don't touch too much, to be honest. Like I do a bunch with direct sponsorships. I do obviously a ton on the growth side, and increasingly more on the monetization, like upfront in the post opt-in flow. But really, like the ad networks, other than just like meeting them and working with them, I've never done a bunch with them. So this is a real learning experience for me. I'm enjoying it.
To be fair, like I would say, yes, we're an ad network, but when we sell as if we're selling direct, right? Like, and that's not to say that I go out and pitch the water coolest, for example. Like I would never do that, because that would undermine Tyler's ability to do that himself in the market. We do pitch quality and we are transparent. That's part of the difference in terms of what we have to offer versus like a live intent or maybe some of these other newsletter sort of networks where you don't know what you're getting. You don't know where your ads are running. I think that those things are important. And, when we talk to our publishers, we encourage them, like, sell as much of your inventory direct as you possibly can. Like I'm ultimately happy for you if I say, hey, like it's July 17th, we're looking at August, like what dates do you have? And you're like, nope, we're sold out. I'm like, hey, that's awesome. It means that you're healthy. It means that the industry is healthy. And ultimately that's going to help us. But if you're like, I'm 90% sold out, I'm like, great, give me your 3 spots that you haven't sold. And hopefully they're brands that you're not calling on, or, are new brands for the audience, or something that you wouldn't have thought of. And I think that's all really healthy. But direct sponsorship is awesome when you reach a certain size. I think it's just harder for a lot of these creators to do that until they reach a certain audience level, and to get the attention of a buyer, is really challenging. When you have now, it's easier than ever to get in front of somebody or to reach out to somebody. These people are just inundated. Once they run one newsletter ad, everyone's seen it, and then their inbox is just flooded with everyone reaching out.
We were talking about this yesterday. Yeah, it's like as soon as you get on the list, right, you're just getting inundated.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Totally.
Louis, want to take the next question?
Yeah, I absolutely can do. So I have a question of my own that I want to get into. One of the things that I always like to talk to people about who come on the show, it's really interesting to talk to other newsletter operators about this, but almost even more people who are in the space but not primarily running a publication themselves. Because I bet if you're talking to brands about the kinds of newsletters that they want to sponsor all day, I bet you're seeing a bunch of opportunities for like, damn, I wish there were more good newsletters in this space, or that talked about this, or that reached this topic or this audience. So is there anything standing out to you at the moment? We have a bunch of people watching and listening to this who are, I would say, newsletter curious is maybe the best way to describe them. They're sort of thinking about what their first or what their next newsletter might be. It would be kind of interesting to hear, are there any spaces where you think there's a room or opportunity for more if you're going to go the ad-supported route?
I mean, in terms of advertiser demand, we work with companies across the board. So we work with companies in health and wellness. We work with companies in finance. We work with companies in insurance, right? When you work with companies that are more general market focused, like auto insurance, anyone who has a car, so that's a fairly big cohort. they might have some specific asks. So like interesting, they'd be like, oh, older audiences. Well, okay, like we can reach that actually. Surprisingly, there's a number of publishers. Maybe it's because it's email that do really well against like a 55 plus audience. It's kind of interesting. And those people tend to have a lot of money. And so it's sort of, I think that's an interesting take. If you're like, how do I be the antithesis to social, which tends to be a younger medium? You know, maybe it's like I go older, right? And I go for that older audience. But I think it's less obvious when it's a general market. It's like, okay, lifestyle or news or whatever. I go back to just do what you're interested in yourself, and if you do a good job, people are going to read your newsletter, and they're going to be engaged readers, and ultimately, then they're valuable to an advertiser, regardless of what the subject matter is. That being said, like certainly B2B, and I know that's a broad topic because B2B can cover any number of things, but like you do have a lot of like solutions-based companies, SaaS companies, technology companies that are really hungry for inventory, like against specific audiences that are hard to reach, right? Like hard to reach C-suite level decision makers, hard to reach IT professionals or HR professionals. Like these are very specific niche audiences. And the challenge you can have if you're an operator of a newsletter, especially if you haven't done a lot of ad sales, is like you sort of might say, okay, I only have like 10,000 readers. It seems like a low number, but that actually could be really quite valuable. And you just have to understand like how to properly position yourself and monetize it. Because for a lot of these companies, like one conversion could be worth like, 10, 15, $20,000. And we're doing more B2B right now. And the way that we figured out how to do it is like we understand, because the CAC number is so high, like the value of each conversion is so much higher than you see in consumer. We're able to charge a much higher CPC, or just simply buying a flat rate because we know it's going to back out. And so you're able to bridge the gap between providing like the value that the newsletter operator would have to get on a revenue basis that wouldn't necessarily be reflected in a standard CPC deal because they have too small of an audience. And then the ad that they're running is like so specific that it's not going to generate a lot of clicks, but the ones that it does are so valuable. So I guess that's a long answer to your question. I would say like, I think that if you can find like an underserved audience that is super valuable, I know that's not a specific answer, but like, I've mentioned a few that we get asked about, like HR decision makers, people that are buying business software, people that are buying large enterprise software solutions that cost like hundreds of thousands of dollars. You can make a case like some of the real estate newsletters charge tremendous sponsorship fees relative to their audience size, and you're like, how does that make any sense? And you're like, well, it doesn't, except that all they need is one of those people to buy something, and it's like more than justified in terms of the price that they're asking. I think it's easier too, because the bar is lower in terms of like the audience growth you would need in that space to make yourself viable from a business perspective, versus if you're like, I'm going to be a news aggregator, like you then need millions of subscribers to make that work. And I think that's much harder. People obviously have done it, it's clearly because there's a few big ones out there, but it tends to be more difficult. I don't know if that answers your question, but it's my take on it.
Yeah, I like it. It's more of just like a curiosity every time we have someone coming on, just to see anything good that people are missing out on, any sort of like ideas that people can jump on and go after. But
it's one of the things that we talk about like is really like what tends to happen from a marketing perspective. So this might be helpful. If you're a brand, you're probably doing search, you're probably doing Facebook, and you're doing whatever else, and like you end up with this idea of like who your customer is based on maybe anecdotal data. And so that you end up doubling and tripling and quadrupling down on that when you're buying Facebook, because you start buying very specific audiences, and it can kind of be like an echo chamber. And we'll often say like, well, newsletters are an interesting place for you to test because like you potentially find new customers that you didn't realize are interested in your product. And so then the answer becomes like less, oh, I want more of this. What I really want more of are converting customers. Like I want to find like engaged audiences. And there are some newsletters that we work with that like, it doesn't even matter what we advertise there, consistent performance across the board. And it's just because like the content's really well written, like it's a legitimate newsletter. There's actual like written copy there. People are reading it. And so the ads that are placed there that fit well within that that content, like contextually, like perform really well consistently over and over and over again. And so we have a short list of go-tos for new advertisers, and then we expand that as we move forward. But yeah, I mean, I think like whatever you're doing, just do it well and you'll have some success.
Nice.
From Dana, she's asking, do inline placements or dedicated sends perform better? I'm actually curious about this, Jeff, and your take on this, because I actually had, I would say like pre Barstool, which was like 2019, 2021 for me, we were having a ton of success with like dedicated blasts. We were charging 5 to 6 times what we were doing for, you know, kind of a native placement. And then I kind of like came out of Barstool. We didn't do any of that at Barstool, and like talked to the sales guys that I had worked with in the past, and they were like, we just don't really do that anymore. Like it doesn't work as well. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. I've tested it a little bit. I've been able to get like, I would say like more to 2 to 3 times, you know, what I was getting for a native placement. But I'm curious like what you see, you know, as far as success, or like when you're talking to a client, like do you recommend sending a dedicated blast or like inline? What works better in your mind?
Love dedicated. Happy to hear that you do it. We're going to be having Ryan reach out for some dedicated inventory. Yes, it depends on the publisher, first of all. But we tend to, like from the advertiser side, dedicateds are awesome. Meaning like it's 100% share of voice, right? Against like a trusted list. So your message, like that's all they're seeing. And so it performs really well from a volume perspective. Like if we're talking about clicks, because like all the clicks are going to that one advertiser. And then like those clicks are super qualified because all the content is just about the brand. So like that's what you're reading. If you're interested, you're going to click on it and you're probably like a qualified user. The flip side of it for the publisher, you know, you have to be judicious with it. Like I would, if this is the advice, if the person's an operator who's asking, I would say like limit the number that you do per month. Like you don't want to oversaturate your audience with them because you're going to lose subscribers for sure. If you do it too many, and then be very thoughtful about the brands, because like if it's, you know, you wouldn't run an ad for like lip gloss. Like that doesn't make any sense for your audience. I wouldn't think. I mean, it
depends how much they pay me.
Yeah. Well, yeah. But like there's probably a million brands that like it would make sense for you to run dedicated before that. And like that's, you want to make sure that number one, like you're respecting your audience. Like if you're sending them something that is an ad, at least make it something that they should care about potentially, and do right by the brand. Like I know the temptation, like, oh, I'm going to give you, you know, 20 grand for a dedicated or whatever, like, which is maybe 4 times what you would take for an inline. It can be tempting. But like if the advertiser runs it and it's just a total dud, like they're going to be pissed off. Like you're going to have to figure out a way to make good on that if you even can. And, you know, you could potentially hurt your reputation in the business as, you know, as being something that doesn't perform well. So I guess that is a long answer. Also, like it performs really well. They can be fantastic, but you have to be careful about how often you do them. That's saying inline, like, if you do it the right way, if you write it in the same tone and voice as everything else that you're doing, you're using the same sort of font and copy, you know, you have really compelling copy there that explains the product really well, but also is related to the audience, like also super effective, you know? So I don't think it's an either or. I think there's strategies to be brought to bear for both, really.
Have you seen anyone have success with changing up the format of like the traditional ad format that, you know, the Skim and the Morning Brew invented, and then we all just accepted as like the standard, right? Have you seen anyone do anything differently? Like I don't even know what it would look like, but I think about it a lot. I'm just like, I feel like we've, through the years of newsletter creation, we basically trained people to look past ads because they know exactly where they're going to be.
So I'll tell you something that's really interesting. Like years ago, I worked for a video technology company, and like one of our challenges was distribution. And so we're like, oh, like maybe we can figure out a way to do email. And like you just can't do video and email. Like even now you think like, oh, like it's 2025. Like why can't we figure that out? Like it's just the way that email is built. Like there's just so many restrictions on it that like you really are limited to what you can do within that box. You know, what you really have to do is like iterate on the sort of very small number of options that you do have. And so you have text and you have images Those images could be like a GIF or something, but like it's not really video. Or you can put like an ad unit in there, which is a whole different thing. And maybe that could play video, but it would be really a pretty shitty experience. And so I think the answer is like, I think the way the Skim does it, I don't think is the most effective way anymore. I mean, they've been doing it that way for so long, and there's some things like we were buying a lot of the Skim, and we still do, and I think it's it's a really good audience, and I'll buy their cheapest inventory, which are this used to be called the Skim picks. They call it something else now, because it's like it's just describing a product. It's not even telling you what it is, and there's only one link. So like you're really vetting your audience there versus like a logo. Like I hate like a logo. Again,
I agree. It's so pointless, I feel like. And I still do it, and I kind of put it up there. I'm like, I don't know what the point of this is. I think it's just going to get people to click by mistake.
But we will ask our publishers to make them not clickable. Especially if we're paying on a CPC. Okay. I'm like, I don't want to pay for that. It's not a real like vetted click. That's a
good idea.
So be on the lookout for that information, for that instruction when you run one of our ads. But
I probably yesterday I was getting all those clicks from that. So yeah. My bad.
Well, we filtered them out, so don't worry about it. I think that like, again, there's only so many ways to do it. Like what we've seen be most effective is like body copy in the middle. It depends like also on the newsletter. So like, you write a fairly text-heavy newsletter. Like you've got a lot to say. There's not a lot of imagery in there, but that also gives you the opportunity. I think this morning you ran like 3 ad positions.
It was 2. I'm actually waiting to see how pissed off people are. But
I didn't find it to be like. I mean, I guess like so. I make a joke that I read newsletters to see the ads. That's like my job. But I didn't find it to be like abusive. Especially because the products were both pretty relevant. I mean, they're relevant to like what you do, right? And Morning Brew can get away with that because like they have so much content in every newsletter versus like, if you're an aggregator or like an RSS feed or something like that, or it's just like you're just linking out to different stories, it would be weird for you to have multiple ads because it's just there's not a lot of content there to read through. So I think the moral of the story is like what works well for the Skim works well for them because they fit it into the format with which they already write. Like that's their voice. Same with Morning Brew. And so you don't have to do it their way. I would say to everyone, do it your own way, meaning like whatever you're writing, however you're writing it, like that's what your ad should look like. So, if you write little pieces with GIFs, like your ad should have the same exact layout. If you don't use any imagery, like all of a sudden having an image, it's going to be jarring to a reader. They're like, yep, that's an ad. That's different than everything else here. And like, I'm just going to ignore that.
Right. And that becomes the problem with kind of I don't even know what we would call it, but like the semi-programmatic stuff that you just drop in with some code, right? It looks exactly like that standard format. It's like it always has to have the image and it doesn't feel right.
A lot of operators don't have the time or the bandwidth to like work on this stuff. We certainly will provide copy options in advance and like we'll tell our operators that we work with, like you have 2 choices, like you can use what's been approved or like you can change it and then we just have to approve the changes. And we encourage that. If you're willing to go and put in the effort to create something that's like unique, awesome. That's going to be fantastic.
I'm just using this as like for my consultancy, because you mentioned something that actually came up in consulting, and I think this might be relevant to the audience. You said a newsletter that's basically an RSS feed. Obviously, those have been, the more digest, heavy newsletters. Those have been popular for a very long time. They tend to get a lot more clicks, right? Because they're just sending you out to a website. That's the goal. People are monetizing typically on the back end through the website. I'm curious, do you see those convert well with ads, right? Because if people are like trained to click, in my brain at least, it says that they would be good newsletters to put ads in because people are clicking a lot. Or is that counterintuitive because there's not a lot of like content, people feel no connection to them, it's more of a utility?
In our experience, they're not the best converting. They can drive a lot of volume, as you said, especially if you can sort of mask the ad. Like, if you're just doing image maybe one line of copy and then like a link.
Right.
It's hard for a reader, especially if you put something like really compelling there, like really
Mm.
interesting, sort of pie in the sky type of product. You can generate a lot of clicks. But like, I think the less copy you have, anything under 40 words, you tend to skew towards like what just like display advertising level of performance, which is really low. And everything has its time and place. The trouble is when you sell that, not as that, you sell that as something more premium and you charge like a premium for it, then you're gonna have people who are disappointed. So I think like those are the types of newsletters that actually like a live intent would make sense for, like, because it's like it's all the same stuff.
Right.
Versus like, and we do work with some of them. But if they could take the time to write just a little bit more of an explanation beneath each image, that would go a long way. But I get it. Like that's not necessarily the purpose of it. And I totally understand. So I think it's about setting expectations with any of this stuff. So as long as like you tell an advertiser like, hey, this is what it looks like, you can probably expect a good amount of volume. The conversion rate might not be as high. And maybe because the volume is so much higher, you just charge less on a per, whether it's click or view or whatever basis, and you sort of, it comes out in the wash anyway, and everyone's still happy.
You can send me a bill for that. Louis, sorry, I've been dominating this conversation. Do you have any more questions for Jeff?
Yeah, I mean, I guess one thing that we're touching a lot on the ways that a newsletter would monetize through something like Media Intercept. One thing that I think I'm seeing an uptick in from especially creator-driven newsletters who are maybe, a lot of them are coming in from places like YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram and places. And they're doing a lot of partnerships, right? So they're creating, I guess we'd call it like an advertorial, like a sponsored content piece, basically.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen a bunch of those be interesting for people because it feels a lot more native, and you can, in a lot of cases, you can get sort of like even like a regular weekly segment setup or a regular daily, right? Where you sort of sell it once and keep doing it. Where do you feel like that is sort of partnership or sponsored content is going to go in newsletters in the future?
Yeah, I mean, like if someone pays you enough of a premium for you to do that, like you should do it. And I think it's like I've always said, I started my career and I've been in branded content like I don't want to say how long, but well, I'll say it, like 17 years. So it's a while, right? And I started working for a company that was became one of the first YouTube MCNs, like taking mommy bloggers and putting them on video and then selling that to advertisers and creating like branded content series. So, my philosophy with that has always been like, if the content's good enough for someone to watch it anyway, right? If it's something that it has utility for a viewer or a reader or whatever, that's the ultimate win. Because like you're basically saying, here's something that you're interested in. You're going to like it anyway. It just happens to touch on something that's important to the brand as well. I mean, there's so many ways that you can be really effective with that. You just think of travel, right? If Marriott comes to a travel publisher and says like, could you write like as a part of your newsletter, like a hotel tip of the week or something like that. That's like something that someone who's reading travel content is going to want to know anyway. And like the fact that it's also helping their business, it's really effective. And if you can extract a premium from the advertiser for that, like say like, hey, this is outside of what I normally do, so you have to pay me double or whatever, like great, even better for everybody. So I just think the challenge is with that, like, it gets back to like why a company like us exists, or some of the challenges of an individual operator going out and sourcing their own sponsorship deals. Like, how large do you have to be to get Marriott's attention in this example? If you have 10,000 subscribers, like, do they care about that? Probably not, right? They probably don't, because they're so.
I can tell you it's not 100,000. Like I can't get those phone calls, right? So
we can talk about this as well. Like sort of this gets back to the challenge of like that, the newsletter space has in terms of getting the Fortune 500, just as an example, like into the space. And I think like what a lot of people don't really understand that haven't been in media and advertising for a long time, it's like not a money question. It's not a question of like, can they could afford to buy every ad on every newsletter probably across like, the whole internet. It's not that. It's like, it's a time thing. It's like if they can't spend millions of dollars at like with one press of a button, they don't have enough people to manage it and to deal with it. And so like the only way, I mean, I would think that that's ultimately going to happen is through like a company like ours or others that are trying to figure this out in the space, where they say to us, hey, here's $1 million, like for Marriott. We want advertorial type of content in like the top 200 travel newsletters. Just go do that for me. And so then they'll task us with that, and we're familiar with the space. And it doesn't mean that like the operator itself is losing, because they're not. Like I'll then go to those operators like, hey, we have a really unique opportunity. This is outside of what we do. Like I'll pay you a premium for it. I'm just taking, my cut for doing the work. So I think ultimately that's what's going to have to happen, for this stuff to really scale. But, a lot of what you're talking about also, if these creators have big platforms like on other channel, like in Instagram or TikTok or YouTube, usually the newsletter is sort of like not an afterthought, but it comes as part of the package, right? They're going to sell their whole audience across all channels. And so they may be big enough across all of that to justify like a one-off deal. But I think like in the newsletter specific space, to get some of these bigger brand dollars in, you're going to have to see some sort of aggregation of creators to come together. But I think that it's more effective for sure. And if you can pull it off, it's great. And if you can offer it, fantastic. I talk about this with creators all the time, but it takes more time. So you got to weigh the cost versus the benefit.
I think we had time for one more question. I just want to go to you, Jeff, straight up. What's your hottest take for the newsletter space in 2025?
I'll come from the revenue side. I think that as the business matures and you have more like sophisticated buyers entering the space, you're going to see like a lot of what I consider to be like fraudulent or questionable behavior just be punished. And I think a lot of platforms that are out there today are going to have to change the way they operate in order to survive. Because like there's just going to be such a low tolerance for some of the nonsense that goes on. And then I think, hand in hand with that is just some sort of standardization that we've talked about. Like across the board, I think as an industry, we have to come to accept like certain measurement standards in terms of like what an audience actually is. So like you can tell me your list size is whatever you want. It doesn't make it so, right? And you can tell me your open rate is whatever you want to tell me it is. And that doesn't make it so, because so many different people use so many different methodologies to determine those things. So I think, as the space matures, you're going to start to see the only way that it's going to grow from a revenue perspective and, to attract brand dollars and more mature advertisers, which is what we all want to see, right? There's going to have to be some growing up. Like some people are going to have to like sacrifice certain things that they want to go with in terms of how we measure and how we deliver. And, it's interesting for us because like we work with newsletters, again, that are published on all platforms. So we sort of see the differences. A lot of it can be a big problem. We've sort of narrowed, we very rarely at this point see huge discrepancies in numbers, but it still does pop up. But yeah, there's just still massive fragmentation like across the board. And I think that like you're going to see consolidation. You're going to see some players probably just drop out and go out of business. And ultimately, like any other business, the strongest will survive and they'll probably team up together, because that's ultimately the only way this is going to make sense. You cannot have, like, from an advertising perspective, like 200,000 options for an advertiser, because they just don't know how to deal with that. It's got to be like 3 or 4 solutions that they're going to buy, and then that money will trickle down to the creators, which is totally fine. I mean, that's like what YouTube is basically.
Long term, looking 2, 3, 5 years out, you're thinking the percentage of earnings that come from platforms like yours will be, well, the amount that percentage will be higher as a percentage of what creators are earning.
I think it will always be like you're always going to have like individual large brands, and they will not be the same ones that you have today. We've mentioned a couple of them. We know who they are, like the big newsletters that have like millions of subscribers that can like stand on their own, right? I mean, here's how if you want to take it like a parallel from like, connected TV, for example, like early on, every news channel or every TV channel created like a streaming app. Right. And then they tried to actually sell that as a subscription. And like people aren't going to buy that way. There's just too many choices. They want it bundled. As much as we all say like, oh, we hate cable, but like, do we hate it? Or do I want it like, here's $100, just give me everything, as opposed to like, I'm going to pay $2 for this and $7 for that and $8 for this. And it's like a mess. So I think you're still going to have large newsletters that are going to be able to go out and stand on their own. I think you're going to have like very specific interest-based newsletters that cover certain topics that like have very particular advertisers. Like anything that's like focused on developers, even if they have a smaller audience, like the way those companies buy advertising, it's like a whole different market. It's a known, very specific thing. We do some of it, but there are other companies that are much more focused on that. So I think those things are all going to exist. But I think like ultimately just knowing how really large brands buy, like the way that they buy, the only way that those dollars are going to start to flow into this channel is through some sort of aggregation. It just doesn't make sense any other way. And again, that doesn't have to mean that like, the creator suffers. I don't look at it like that. I just think that like you'll still make the same money. You'll just have more opportunities that are more interesting with bigger brands. I mean, like newsletters are excited when we come to them and say, hey, like we have a Dell NVIDIA deal. Like that's an awesome product. And like these operators are super excited to have like that brand featured in their newsletter. Number one, they can't get it themselves. So it's like hard for them unless they pull like an affiliate link, which sucks, right? Like you're not gonna make any money. It lends like credibility to what they're doing. Like, oh, Dell wants to promote like AI, artificial intelligence chips, like to my audience. Like that's like, it's cool, right? And so I think like, and they'll get paid for it, right? They make good money from it. So I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I think that it's just, that's the way it's going to have to be for a large portion of operators. If those are the types of brands they want to attract, they're going to have to work through some network that can aggregate them with a larger number of creators to make it make sense for this buyer that maybe has 100 million they want to spend on newsletters, but doesn't know what to do with it and can't spend the time to talk to 10,000 people.
Really good point.
Cool. Well, we ended on a positive note, right? We did better than last week.
Yeah, exactly. This is awesome, man. We appreciate you hopping on. I think that's all we have time for today. But where can everyone find you? What should they read? I know you just relaunched a newsletter yourself.
I'm going to try to be a little bit spicy with it. I tend to like read through LinkedIn and just like want to like rip my hair out at like a bunch of the nonsense that you see, like self-promotional stuff that people publish that you just know isn't true. So I'm going to try to, without like directly calling people out, at least give my take on it and why, what I think the reality is of the business, which should hopefully be helpful to like operators, right? That try to understand like the money side of it. Cause I think that tends to be a disconnect. I don't want to spend too much more time, but like I was at a newsletter conference in May in New York. And I think the big complaint was like there was just no conversation about how to make money. And
I don't know. I remember the main complaint at that conference was that the water bottles were too small. That was the one that I remember. People, ridiculous, tiny, small water bottles. That was the main complaint that I was hearing.
I can tell you that I sat at a table downstairs because I don't bother going to the auditorium because I don't care. With like, except for my part, of course. Except for your part. Your part was great, and I watched it on television. But with like one of the other big buyers in the space, like they're a company that buys a lot of newsletter, and we were just sort of talking shop because we know each other. And we were like, at some point, we're like, this would have been such an interesting panel and would have been so helpful for all of these newsletter creators to understand like what people care about, what advertisers care about, like what matters. And I think like to set realistic expectations and to give instruction, like how can I be better? How can I better position myself to make money? So yeah, that's a lot of what I'll talk about, but you can find me. So our Media Intercept is the company, www.mediaintercept.com. You can find me on LinkedIn, Jeffrey Eisenberg, look for me with Media Intercept, but yeah, our website's the main place to go. And if you have inquiries, if you're a creator and you want to make money, we're excited to push ads to everybody. We take a hands-on approach. So you don't just sign up and wait. Like we actually talk to you and have you approve ads in advance and have a Slack channel where there's frequent communication. So there's no mistakes made, hopefully, right? Tyler, no mistakes?
Zero mistakes.
And then
it's my VA's fault.
There are some advertisers out there listening, of course, same story, right? Like we help you get in front of hundreds of newsletters instead of one or two. And we tend to be pretty efficient. So, but this has been great. I really appreciate the opportunity to chat, and I'm happy to talk with you guys anytime you want to talk about revenue and monetization or anything else.
We'll take you up on that for sure. Thanks for joining us.
Awesome. Thanks, man.
Yep.